We give a lot of good assignments, but by giving too much of it, we have turned it into something that is not going to be nearly as helpful. The AP exam for most courses starts at application, moves through analysis, and ends somewhere up here around evaluation. And if we are never getting to those levels, then we're not getting our kids ready, no matter how much we're covering in class.
If your AP classroom feels like a 9-month sprint from August to May, this episode might just change your life, or at least your pacing guide. Too often, we equate rigor with speed, more chapters, more homework, more pressure. But the high-performing AP classrooms, they operate differently. In this episode, veteran AP educator Suzanne Dilday joins us to unpack a powerful idea. AP is a mindset shift, not a pacing shift. We talk depth over coverage, coaching over lecturing, and building skills instead of just delivering content. Why do some AP classrooms produce strong scores and confident students, while others create anxiety, disengagement, or attrition? If you want better AP results without burning your students out or yourself, this episode is full of practical shifts you can start using tomorrow. Welcome to From Classroom to Campus. I'm your host, Philip Bates, and joining me as always is Megan Blessing.
Hi, Philip.
And we have the wonderful Suzanne here. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely.
All right, so first question, Suzanne. How would your AP students describe your teaching style?
I think my AP students would describe me as very no-nonsense, very structured, very organized, very type A. And I think much to their chagrin, they would all have to agree that it is impossible to get Mrs. Dilday off topic, even during 8th period on a Friday.
That is an impressive feat right there.
It's a gift.
Please tell me they comment on how beautifully put together you always are. You're the best dressed person I think I know in the entire world.
I think my students actually invented the OOTD post.
Okay, what is that?
The outfit of the day post.
Nice.
Because frequently they would say, Miss Dilday, look at you online. What? Why am I online?
Because you're famous?
No, because someone had, without my consent, taken a picture of whatever I was wearing and posted it that day.
Well, so if you're listening, unfortunately, you don't get to see Suzanne's outfit. But if you check us out on YouTube right now, you're going to get to see her very, very well put together outfit. All right, so let's really dive in. So a lot of folks think of AP classrooms and they think it means, going faster, assigning more homework, assigning like a ton of big projects. Where do you think that misconception comes from?
Oh, wow. I think we have a lot of ideas around the idea of AP programs. I think one of the ideas that we have about AP programs is that an AP class is supposed to be harder than an on-level class. We also have this idea, and rightfully so, that AP classes are supposed to replace entry-level college classes. And so we kind of mash those ideas together, and we end up, I think a lot of times, teaching AP classes like they are college survey courses.
Sure.
And I'm not sure really that that is the best approach for a 16-year-old. And, I can say that because I guarantee you that that was the approach that I took for many years teaching AP classes is, it must be this way. Yeah. And I think also in the back of our minds, we have this idea a lot of times that AP teachers are the best teachers in the department, and they are the hardest teachers in the department. And we have kind of conflated the idea of being best with being hard, and you put all of that together, and we create these classes where we give huge assignments, we create high-stakes situations, and we really kind of don't do, I think, our kids a lot of service sometimes by taking that approach in the classroom.
So do you think hard and rigor are the same thing?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay, what's different?
I think that kids understand that when a class is hard, but rigor is not a word that they really think too much about. That's a word that really I think teachers have to own and be responsible for. And I do think that there's a huge difference between a class that's hard and a class that's rigorous.
So what does rigor look like from a student perspective versus a teacher's perspective?
I think that from a student perspective, they're not going to see rigor, they're going to see hard. And here's what it's going to look like. I made a few notes because I thought, might as well come clean and, let's talk about some of the mistakes that I've made in the classroom.
All right.
So a hard class is one that has a lot of volume over value.
Yeah.
And I can say that I have definitely given kids reading assignments of 30 to 50 pages a night.
Yeah.
But that's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure that I could read 30 to 50 pages on a regular basis every night, And so that's hard, definitely. A hard class is going to be one that focuses on obscure information and trivia. For example, I guarantee you, I took a lot of pride in giving my English students reading quizzes that were Cliff's Notes proof.
No easy way out.
No easy way out. Doggone it, if you were going to pass my quiz, because you read those chapters, but not because, you went and bought the yellow book.
But it's hard to make questions like that, isn't it?
Oh, let me tell you, I was good at it. But the reason why I was good at it is because I was pulling out obscure details. Yeah. Characters that were minor, events that really didn't make any difference to the story. Yeah. And yeah, they were hard quizzes to pass, but if I'm being really honest with you, they weren't rigorous because I was still functioning on a really low critical thinking level. Sure. It was still just recall and comprehension when you get right down to it. So it was hard. Was it rigorous? Probably not.
I had somebody describe, or an AP teacher I talked to one time, I want students' head to hurt, not their hand to hurt. Meaning, I want the end of the class period for their head to hurt because they're thinking and they're trying to put things together. Right. But if their hand hurts from writing too much or for just annotating to annotate, that's not what I want. I always thought that was a good way to.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great way to look at it. Yeah. I think a hard class is going to depend on doing that much writing because it depends on memorization. Memorization equals success in a hard class. And there are a lot of rigid expectations, I think, too, in a hard class where, you hate to say it, but it's set up where it's my way as the teacher or it's the highway. You're going to do this the way I tell you to do this, and if you don't, you're not going to succeed. Yeah. And there's a real sink or swim kind of mentality. Sure. It's the idea of, well, give it your best shot. Have at it because the cream will rise to the crop or, to the top. Yeah. Having a class that's set up that way really only ends up rewarding students who are already proficient. Sure. It rewards the kids who kind of don't really need you anyway. Yeah. And I'm not sure, if we're being entirely honest, if that's really, why we're in the classroom. So I think a rigorous class, on the other hand, is going to be characterized in a little bit different way. It's going to be about quality over quantity. Instead of 40 math problems all in one night, maybe just 4. And they're really hard ones. But the quantity is not as important as the quality there.
Why do you think teachers get caught in the thinking of, I've got to give more questions or I've got to give more work? How do you think they fall into that?
I think, once again, it kind of goes back to that idea that we have in the back of our head that we've got to have a hard class because AP classes are hard. And I think the easiest way to make a hard class is to fall back on piling a lot of work on and not really asking students to do as much thought as they need to do. It's easy. And that's not to say that teachers are always looking for an easy way out, but teachers are just as overloaded as their students are.
Absolutely.
And so if it is a means to achieve an end that you want, then sometimes you take it.
Sure. All right. So I'm going to give you some instructional practices. I kind of know what you're going to say about the first one. And you're going to tell me if it's rigorous, is it overkill, or does it depend? All right. So assigning 30 multiple choice questions for homework.
What kind of multiple choice questions are they?
Are
they math? Are they English? Are they history?
Ooh. We're going to go with English. 30 multiple choice questions.
Okay. I am going to say that is probably rigorous, but probably also overkill. Because there's no question that completing multiple choice questions that are like the ones that are on an English exam, those are going to be definitely functioning at a higher thinking level, but does a kid need to do 30 in one night? Probably not. In order to really do well on them and be able to say, here's why I chose the answers that I chose, and talk about their thought process, they probably need to do fewer of them. So that's maybe a depends.
Yeah, so you gave them a rigorous assignment.
Yeah, I'm going to wean out on that one. I'm going to say it depends.
All right, how about this? This is from the English perspective as well. Having students annotate every single passage or poem that they ever come across in your class.
I think that's rigorous because I think that there are a lot of reasons why you would be annotating. There are a lot of different things you would be looking for to annotate. I think that is a blanket kind of a term that you can customize to any kind of a reading assignment that you're going to give.
Yeah, that's just good executive function.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If you're looking for something different every single time, then you are flexing all the muscles.
Yeah, good. How about doing 2 free response questions a week?
Ooh, I am going to say that is probably overkill.
Okay. Why?
Because feedback is so important to the learning process, and it is so incredibly difficult to give feedback on that many assignments in a week. If you figure that, teachers today might have upward of 150 students that they're teaching. To think about having to give feedback on 300 essays.
Yeah, it's impossible.
It's impossible. You could do it, but you'd be handing those papers back to them 3 weeks later, and at that point, the opportunity to learn something from the experience really has gone. So I'm going to say it's overkill. And as you're asking me these questions, I guess kind of what I'm realizing is we give a lot of good assignments. We give a lot of really terrific opportunities for students to be thoughtful about them. But by giving too much of it, we have turned it into something that is not going to be nearly as helpful.
Yeah, it's good.
Who would think that paradox would be true?
Too much of a good thing.
Too much of a good thing.
Yeah. All right. So I've heard this a ton from AP teachers, and it is essentially your CED, so your course and exam description. It's you've got to teach all of the CED before the exam. If you don't, you're a failure. Your students are going to do horrible on the exam. It's just, if you're a new AP teacher, that is just beat into your head, teach the entire CED. But I think, you can sabotage students potentially by doing that. And what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's an interesting thing. Teachers have available to them 2 really good resources for their courses. They've got the course description book, as you said. That's the document that College Board is going to give you where they say, here is what we're going to test on the exam.
Yeah.
Then you have the released exam questions that are available on AP Classroom. This is what is actually being tested on the exam. And a lot of times, those 2 things are not the same.
Okay.
And it really relies on the teacher to do a lot of investigation to see, all right, where's the discrepancy? I know for sure in AP Spanish, for example, there are a lot of learning objectives that are in the course description book that are never assessed on the exam. And that's not to say that they're not worthy objectives, but if a teacher is barreling through and making sure that they are going to cover everything in the course description guide, they are spending time on some things that maybe don't matter as much.
Nice.
I definitely know that that's true in a lot of the history courses. For example, take AP US History. If you look at the course description guide, there's 9 units there, and they look as if, oh, well, these are all equally important. And history is a course that has a perennial challenge of how do I get through this much material? Because the amount of material you got to get through increases every year. The longer we live, the bigger the course gets. And, if a teacher just taught to what was in the course description book, they would be moving at a breakneck speed. They would be burning themselves and their students out. They would be skimming the top of things. If you come over here and you look at the released questions, what you begin to realize is that units 1 and 2 really don't have much that's assessed on the test. And if you look at the released FRQs, 55% of the test, most of the test, if a kid knows about half a dozen topics, if they are familiar, let's say, with Native American issues, women's issues, imperialism, Cold War, a couple more, they are going to be just fine on the exam. 55% of the test. And so, what that says is a teacher really is going to have to take a look at those two things side by side to make sure, absolutely sure, that they know what is being tested and how it's being tested if they want to make sure that their kids are ready for the exam.
I think that's just outstanding advice. And I think too often, AP teachers hear CED, but are they going and looking at all the release exams, analyzing those questions, and putting those two things together? I think that is something that many of them miss, specifically new AP teachers who have just been drilled in their head, CED or nothing.
It used to be a lot more difficult than it is now. The College Board used to be very stingy about showing you what was actually on the exam. We really were doing well every 5 years to get one released exam. But now that they're putting everything on AP Classroom really on a pretty frequent basis, it's a whole lot easier to be able to hold those two up together and to make some good judgment calls about what you're doing in your own classroom.
Sure, tools are there.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's talk about AP Classrooms. Some create anxiety, they create burnout, and then others build confidence and resilience in students. So what's the difference in those two classrooms?
Certainly, an AP class always provokes a certain level of anxiety in students. Just by the sheer nature of the fact that it's an AP class. But I think that teachers sometimes create a level of anxiety, sometimes on purpose, but sometimes accidentally. And I'm going to say more often than not accidentally. Students need a couple of things. Students need challenge, and they need a safety net. And if you have one or the other and not both, you're going to be creating a situation of anxiety. The challenge part is easy. That we've all had colleagues, or maybe we've been that colleague, who has taken pride in coming in on the first day of school and saying, well, half of you won't be here in December, and starting with a kind of anxiety. But I don't think that that's what most AP teachers are doing in their classroom. I think most AP teachers are very kind, very supportive, very caring. They want their students to succeed. But I think a lot of times we inadvertently set up the processes in our class where we are instructing once, assessing once, we're moving on, and there's no second chance on whatever it is that we were trying to teach to our kids. And we inadvertently communicate to students that I expect perfection the first time around. And that's a totally unrealistic thing. And we don't even realize that that is what we're communicating. But that is the kind of thing that is going to send kids down to the counselor's office, to get a schedule change. Because they need that safety net.
So what are your thoughts on redoing tests? because I've seen situations where student doesn't even study the first time around because there's a retest and they can just do the retest and not worry about it. So how do you balance, like you say, providing a challenge there, but then not allowing a student a way to kind of just bail themselves out by just doing the retest?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can provide that kind of safety net for kids. And I think it's not a one-size-fits-all, and I don't even think that a teacher needs to do the exact same thing every single time herself.
Sure.
But I do think the existence of some of those safety features is important. For example, I'll give you something that I did in my class. As an English teacher, we wrote a lot. We wrote all the things. We wrote essays. We wrote free response timed writings. We wrote 10-page research papers, all the things we wrote. And in my class, for every writing assignment, it didn't matter what kind of a writing assignment it was, a student had the opportunity to take the feedback that I gave them on their assignment, revise that paper, turn it back into me to earn back half the points that they lost. And for a lot of students, that was a game changer. For a student who did well on the assignment, moving from a 90 to a 95,
no big deal.
No big deal. The fact that you could not redo the paper and get a 100 really encouraged a student to do the best that they could the first time around, But a kid who made an 80, who could bring their score to a 90, that will change your GPA right there. A kid who, for whatever reason, just completely blew it on the assignment, if they can go from a 50 to a 75,
that's big.
Yeah, that keeps you playing soccer for 6 weeks.
Absolutely.
It's that is a safety net that makes it worthwhile for your most struggling students. And those are the ones that are most, I think, at risk of running down to the counselor's office. And it sounds like that would be a lot of work on a teacher. You're going to grade something twice. Well, yes and no. I never had 100 students write an essay the first time and then 100 students rewrite it the second time. I may have had 20% of my students take advantage of that. And if I've already given them feedback on here are the things that are your weaknesses, when they bring back the improved copy, you don't have to read that far into it before you realize, okay, they've done better or they haven't done better on this. It did not take as much time to read the second time as it did the first time. And what I found was that kids who took advantage of that on a regular basis became the kind of student that didn't need to take advantage of that.
Sure.
So
they grew out of it.
They grew out of it, whether that meant they became better at managing their time, which, let's face it, might have been the reason why they bombed that assignment, or if they really became a better writer. Either way, both are valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take them. So UWorld, which is one of our fantastic podcast partners, does instructional activities. And really the whole purpose of instructional activities is to engage students and get them doing things, talking, discussing, creating, kind of working with the curriculum. For AP teachers, hey, great, go get some UWorld and get our instructional activities. But if they're going to create things on their own and move from that lecture style to that interacting with their student style, what's some advice or some guidance you've got for teachers to do those things?
There's a lot of different approaches that I think you can take. But one of my favorite ways to kind of describe the mindset shift.
Sure,
I like mind shift.
Mind shift is cool.
I know, that's a new thing. We're going to make it a thing. So, one of the shifts that I really like to think about is one, I wish I could say that I thought of it myself, but I did not. I have read a lot of education influencers who write about teaching like a coach.
Sure.
And, we've all kind of heard that metaphor. In fact, last week I was reading an article by one of my favorite educational influencers, AJ Giuliani.
Okay. We'll link whatever he's put out there.
Fabulous blog, writing about making that shift from being a teacher to being a coach. And, while you would think that, they're the same. No, they kind of aren't. A teacher, when you think about it, really has a linear kind of a way that they're moving through their material. They're going to deliver content. They're going to assign a task. They're going to give feedback on that task maybe 2-3 weeks later.
Very systematic.
Whenever they get time to grade it.
Sure.
And then they are moving on.
Yeah.
And like I said, that kind of takes the feedback out of the realm of being able to learn from it.
No matter what's
right. And if you're not ever going back to what you were trying to teach in the first place, who even cares about the feedback? But a coach is going to do something different. A coach is going to deliver content, but it's going to be about this much. They're going to say, here's the play that we're going to work on. And then they are going to run the play. And as soon as they observe and diagnose something going wrong, they're going to blow the whistle. They're going to call everybody over and they're going to say, okay, here's what I'm seeing that I like, but here's what I need to happen now. Let's try that again. And they're going to run the play again. And they're probably going to go through that process several times before the coach says, okay, we got mastery on this. Now we can move on. And finding ways to give that kind of feedback in the moment where it's close to the skill that's being taught, that right there is a challenge, but it's so valuable, for the student. And, once you figure out how you can make that happen in your classroom, it's a game changer for you as well.
So it sounds like it's less about the tool and more about the philosophy.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It is a different way of looking at what you're teaching and what your end goal is. And I know that a lot of teachers will say, well, that's great, but I don't have time to do that. We gotta hit this and we gotta move on to this and we gotta cover this and when you think about it, a coach's job is not any less complicated or jam-packed. They have a season that's less than a school year, and they've got a lot of skills they want their players to learn. They've got a lot of plays that they have got to master. But there is no coach who ever runs an entire scrimmage game every single practice.
Yeah.
They are targeting very selectively some of those skills that they know are going to be the most important. They're prioritizing. They're getting rid of the things that, okay, that's icing on the cake. That can wait. We're going to do the most important thing now. And I think that, that's what championship programs are built on.
I think coaching to mastery is important. And I think making sure you hit something with such intent and such purpose with the class that they master it rather than just keeping on moving on. I think that's really important. And Megan loves her some sports analogies.
No, I don't.
So that was a great sports analogy. The coaching model, I think, is spot on, right?
I guess. Suzanne, I'm disappointed in you.
She's messing with it.
I'm just teasing you.
I do sports references all the time. Every day, educators work tirelessly to keep high school students motivated. But despite their best efforts, too many students still feel lost in a system that doesn't always support their success. At UWorld, we believe education is about unlocking a future full of possibilities. That's why our team of educators created teaching and learning tools for the advanced placement exams. Powerful, easy-to-use resources that help students master even the most challenging concepts. Content that features dynamic visuals created by world-class artists and interactive elements that spark curiosity and a love for learning. Our mission is to help every student reach their full potential. Whether that means earning valuable college credit by excelling on AP exams or achieving their dream SAT score, UWorld is here every step of the way. Every day, across the country, students are using UWorld to turn their aspirations into reality. Discover how UWorld can help your students succeed. Visit collegereadiness.uworld.com to learn more. All right, so let's keep with the providing wonderful AP teachers out there with wonderful things they can implement. So do you have 2 or 3 other instructional shift things that they can do that you think would immediately help students improve performance in the classroom, performance on the AP exam?
I feel like I have some general sorts of advice because it's, as I said, it's not going to be a one size fits all, depending on the subject that you're dealing with, depending on your own curriculum that you are working with. But I do think that there are some general principles that can help a teacher if they want to make that shift from being a hard teacher to being a rigorous teacher. And I hate to say it, the first thing is I think you got to slow down. That is the hardest thing to do because we feel that pressure, but it's about taking a look at what you're teaching and prioritizing and pruning. So here you go, Megan. Here's a better analogy for you.
No more sports.
Horticulture. Here we go.
Horticulture. Teachers are going to have to be Japanese bonsai masters.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Good visual. I like
that.
Thank you. Selectively taking out the things that are unnecessary in order to stay with what is essential. And I think about my own classroom, okay, and the ways in which I made shifts, okay? And, granted, it didn't all happen overnight. It was a little bit at a time as I began to refine my philosophy of what are we doing here, For example, I definitely gave reading assignments that were 30 to 50 pages a night, okay, from The Grapes of Wrath. Okay, The Grapes of Wrath, okay? And what ended up happening invariably is that students were struggling with recall and comprehension because they didn't have time to read that much. They had gotten behind 2 nights ago and there was no way they were catching up. And so they would come to my class and there was no way I could move with them from recall and comprehension to something that was a higher thinking skill, because they were still stuck down here. So I spent the entire class catching them up on what was going on. Now I'm doing all the work. That was an entirely ineffective strategy, okay? So what if instead of assigning 50 pages, I assigned 5 pages? What if instead of assigning that for homework, I sat them down the minute they came into classroom and said, you have 15 minutes, read 5 pages, go. Every kid can read 5 pages in 15 minutes, okay? Now that we are all on the same page, we all have the recall and comprehension like that, now we can move on to some of those higher level thinking skills that they're going to need on the test. And, speaking of The Grapes of Wrath, why am I reading a book this big? Why don't I read The Great Gatsby? They can read that in a third of the time, and they can do all the things they need to do to get ready for the test with that book instead of this book, and maybe I need to let go of the fact that The Grapes of Wrath is my favorite book ever, because the question is, what am I in service of? Myself or my students doing well on the test? And I am going to give what I think is the biggest thing that a teacher can do in their classroom and in their head to help their students and to create a more rigorous class. And that is Bloom's taxonomy.
Okay. The pyramid.
It is not sexy. I'm going to say that right now. We want it to be more innovative. We want the solution to be more complicated and sparkly, but it really is all about Bloom's taxonomy, because if we're being honest about this, we live down here near recall and comprehension a lot, but the AP exam for most courses starts at application, moves through analysis, and ends somewhere up here around evaluation. And if we are never getting to those levels, then we're not getting our kids ready, no matter how much we're covering in class.
Yeah, that's excellent. Megan, you got any questions for Suzanne?
I do. I have a couple of questions. Okay, you talked about the importance of teacher feedback. Can you talk a little bit more about what the best and most effective teacher feedback looks like?
That's a good question. Feedback is something that teachers struggle with, not because they don't know what to say or they don't know how to communicate with students, but how to do it in a timely manner where it is close to the task, and to do it in an efficient manner where they are not killing themselves. English teachers especially can absolutely kill themselves reading and writing notes in the margins, where kids unfortunately don't read them most of the time. For me, what I found was one of the best things that I could do was to get kids started on their writing assignment in class, give them a small portion to be working on, and moving up and down the aisles, taking a look over their shoulder. What are you writing? Let me see your thesis. All right, yeah, that looks great. Wait, what are you saying here? Could you bring this in? Would that make it clearer? And moving on, spending just a few seconds with each student. And sometimes even, it sounds even a little bit elementary, but I do think that the kids kind of appreciated it. Reading something and approving it with a check mark on their paper as I move along. There's a tangible reward there to say, yeah, you are definitely on the right track. Keep on doing this.
Yeah, reinforcing.
Yeah, the reinforcement. And you can catch a lot of things that would have gone astray at the very beginning just by checking right there at the beginning of the task. And it didn't take any more than a class period, but I think it ended up making a large difference in the direction that the assignment headed.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was so good. Thank you, guys. That was my last question.
Hey, Megan, always good questions. We appreciate you. Thank you, Suzanne.
Absolutely. This was fun.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. Was this your first podcast?
This was my first podcast.
Well, I hope you'll come back.
Thank you.
Hopefully, I'm sure you enjoyed not only Suzanne's lovely outfit, if you're able to see it, but also her amazing advice. Folks out there, if you are listening and you're thinking, I've got the best person who would be so great on this podcast, let us know. If you are thinking you'd love to share your AP knowledge and all the great things that you do in your classroom, give us a shout. Maybe we'll have you on. That'd be really exciting for us. Questions, comments, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. We certainly appreciate your support. And please always remember that life begins at the edge of your comfort zone. Thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful day. The opinions expressed by our guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views from Classroom to Campus, UWorld, or its affiliates. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating that really helps us out. Thank you so much.